Hey everyone, it's Julien of the Lafayette Trail. I hope you're doing well. I am today in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm going to dedicate a new Lafayette Trail marker at Connecticut's Old State House, where Lafayette was received on September the 4th, 1824. Lafayette spent a lot of time in Connecticut during the American Revolution. He was here in Hartford in 1780 when George Washington first met Rochambeau of France. And he was in Wethersfield a year later in 1781 when the first coordinated attacks with the new French allies were discussed. The question is, why did this all happen in Connecticut? Well, Connecticut was a great place to show the new French allies how prepared and dedicated the American troops were. Connecticut had a tradition of self-government and free trade going back to its 1662 Royal Charter. It had had time to grow a mercantile class of leaders, like the Trumballs or the Wadsworth, that built wealth off of colonial trade. So when time came to pick a side between the British and the Patriots, Connecticut was ready. As a matter of fact, Connecticut had been ready for over 100 years. Its colonial governor, Jonathan Trumbull, did not flinch. He immediately sided with the Americans because he understood that Connecticut had been united in interest with the American cause long before the American Revolution was even considered. So 50 years later, when Lafayette returns to the United States in 1824, Connecticut welcomes him as a hero. But what does the Frenchman's visit really reveal about Connecticut itself and about the transformations that affected its institutions? These are our questions today. We've got some answers to figure out, so let us waste no time. Let us hit the trail. Let's follow the Frenchmen. In October of 1784, Connecticut was the first state in the country to give Lafayette and his son, George Washington Lafayette, citizenship. A year later, the city of Hartford gave Lafayette freedom to the city. These honors, of course, reflected positively on Lafayette's military contributions during the American Revolution, but also on Connecticut itself, on its institutions, this standing order, this aristocracy that had brought prosperity and pride to the state and at the same time, stability. The standing order reflected how closely intertwined the political, religious, and educational circles had been in colonial Connecticut. Take a look at the New Haven Green, for instance, in the early 1800s. You had the State House, the Congregational Church, and Yale College right next to each other. It almost felt like the colonial alliance between the religious and secular powers was expressed in geography itself and was an expression of the two foundational documents that colonial Connecticut was organized around. Number one, the 1639 Fundamental Orders, which created a church of state, the Congregational Church, and number two, the 1662 Royal Charter, which secured for the colony a higher degree of self-government. By 1780, Connecticut was, with Rhode Island, the only state to not have adopted a state constitution. And what that meant is that the standing order remained in charge. And at the end of the American Revolution, it found shelter in the platform of the Federalist Party. And so it almost sounded like Connecticut was moving forward within the Union at its own colonial pace. In 1800, John Adams and the Federalist Party lost the election to Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republican Party. And with that came a big change in the national political landscape. The Virginia School of Separation between the church and the state was gaining traction at the national level. And here in Connecticut, it started to add additional pressure on Connecticut's colonial architecture. In the early 1800s, religious minorities started to overtly criticize here in Connecticut the privileges that the Congregational Church enjoyed and the proximity that it had with the circles of power. In 1801, the Danbury Baptist Association wrote President Thomas Jefferson a letter complaining about the situation, and President Jefferson responded very famously in a letter calling for a wall of separation between the church and the state. Unfortunately for Connecticut and the Danbury Baptist Association, Connecticut did not offer the pathway for those ideas to become law. It would take another war with England for that to happen. Toward the end of the War of 1812, the Federalist Party called a convention in Hartford in December of 1814. And the members gathered here to criticize Madison's war and big government spending that was associated with it, while the rest of the country was busy fighting off the British. And as a result, the Federalist Party started to lose a lot of credibility at the national level. The stage was set for the dismantling of the colonial alliance between the Congregational Church and the state affairs. Religious minorities in Connecticut, like the Episcopal Church, joined forces with political minorities like the Democratic Republican Party to form a new party, the Toleration Party. And in 1817, the Toleration Party won overwhelmingly the election cycle in Connecticut and propelled Oliver Wolcott Jr. to the governorship of Connecticut. A year later, in 1818, Connecticut finally adopted its very own state constitution, enshrining into law in all transparency the separation between the church and the state, in a move that to some sounded like Connecticut was aligning itself with the rest of the country at the expense of its own colonial heritage. So how could the two ever be reconciled? Well, lucky you, Connecticut. A few years later, there's this Frenchman, Lafayette, that comes back to the United States with one mission and one mission only, that to unite. And fortunately, uniting was something that he knew how to do very well. It was not even 3 weeks into his tour when Lafayette came to Connecticut. He left New York City on August 20th, and he went through many communities along the coastal line, including Greenwich, New Haven, New London, Norwich, all the way to Boston. And then coming back from Boston on September the 3rd, 1824, Lafayette spent the night in Stafford Springs. The next morning, on September the 4th, he proceeded through Tolland and Vernon all the way here, where he was received in Hartford. Lafayette's itinerary throughout Connecticut included moments that were calculated to project unity. And I'll give you two examples. The first one is when Lafayette went to New Haven. He went to see the grave of Timothy Dwight. Mr. Dwight was a former president of Yale College and also an ardent defender of the standing order as a force of good in Connecticut. This was a way for Lafayette to extend an olive branch to the old Connecticut that had honored him in 1784. And when he went to New London a little later, Lafayette was invited to attend church by two congregations, the Presbyterian Church and the Episcopal Church, and he went to both. And it was a moment of unity for these two different congregations. Lafayette entered Hartford on the Morgan Street Bridge. He made 4 stops in total, first at Bennett's City Hotel. From there, he proceeded to the Connecticut State House, then to the house of Daniel Wadsworth, and finally to the State Street Wharf. This is the side of Bennett's City Hotel, the first stop that Lafayette made when he entered Hartford. And here, he was received by the mayor of Hartford, by the governor of Connecticut. He was served a breakfast, and after that, the governor's foot guard escorted him to what's now the Old State House. Coming from Bennett's City Hotel, Lafayette was escorted by the governor's foot guard and taken here to the east yard of the Old State House. He got up and advanced, and he was welcomed here by 800 children from Hartford, including children from what's now the American School for the Deaf. They gave him a poem, they gave him a medal presented by Dr. Comstock, and then finally Lafayette proceeded inside the building and made his way up to the Senate chamber. After the very moving reception that took place on the east yard of the State House, Lafayette was conducted here in the Senate chamber, where he was addressed very famously by the governor of Connecticut, Oliver Wolcott Jr. And this address, we have found a transcript of the address, and the very final words of Governor Wolcott to Lafayette are very famous. He wished Lafayette a happy transition to a glorious immortality. And that happened right here in the Senate chamber. The third stop that Lafayette made when he was in Hartford was Daniel Wadsworth's house, which used to stand where the Wadsworth Athenaeum now is. And on that spot, a very moving scene took place. Lafayette was shown the sash and epaulettes that he wore at the Battle of Brandywine, making a direct connection with the Revolutionary War. We are at the Riverfront Plaza at the foot of State Street, and right here was the very last stop that Lafayette made before he left Hartford. He got on the steamboat the Oliver Ellsworth right here at the State Street Wharf and sailed down the Connecticut River, making 2 more stops before he returned to New York City, in Cromwell and Middletown.
This October 2nd, 2021 commemorates the 250th anniversary of the unit's founding and their annual commemoration of the Count de Rochambeau's march through Connecticut from Newport, Rhode Island to Yorktown, Virginia. The first company governor's foot guard escorted General George Washington at his meeting with the Count de Rochambeau in Hartford to plan and prepare for the Yorktown campaign of the American Revolution that would culminate in decisive victory for independence from England.
When our 2 generals met in person, they were able to take the measure of the other man. They came to trust one another, and in less than a year, the 2 met in Connecticut again, this time in Wethersfield, where they formed plans that eventually led to American victory with French support.
We now invite Monsieur Echet to unveil the Lafayette Trail commemorative marker.
Lafayette was a hero of the American Revolution, and he was celebrated as such. But here in Connecticut, celebrating him also meant something different. Connecticut honored itself and its own affinities with the ideas of self-government when it gave Lafayette and his son citizenship in 1784. But in 1824, it's a whole different story. Connecticut is in need of unity, and Lafayette is the perfect icon to provide that relief. He was able to generate a celebration of Connecticut's colonial heritage while at the same time commend the state for its Republican advances within the Union. Connecticut also demonstrated to Lafayette that a ruling aristocracy could be successfully integrated with a state constitution, and that the separation between the church and the state could be peacefully accomplished within the rule of law, with the goal over time of building a more civic society. These are, in my opinion, powerful takeaways that are still very much alive today. That's it for us in Hartford. I want to thank you for following the Frenchmen. I will see you on the trail very soon. Thank you for watching. À bientôt.